Well, welcome to the 10th anniversary celebration of the Doyle Engaging Difference program. Thank you all so much for being here and for being online. I'm Randy Bass. I'm the Vice President for Strategic Education Initiatives here at Georgetown. And when I was Executive Director of the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship, along with Tom Banchoff, who was Executive Director of the Berkeley Center, we worked with Bill Doyle to establish the Doyle Program for Engaging Difference, whose 10-year milestone we're here to celebrate. One of my favorite writers on education, an educational philosopher named Gert Biesta, has written this: "To engage in learning always entails the risk that learning may have an impact on you, that learning may change you. This means, however, that education only begins when the learner is willing to take a risk." I take that to be applicable not only to the learner, but to everyone involved in education. Education only begins when faculty are willing to take a risk. Education only begins when leadership and institutions are willing to take a risk. Today is a celebration of taking a risk. Bill Doyle took a risk in 2010 when he and his wife Kathy chose to make their substantial investment into what became the Doyle Program. These issues are now on everybody's mind, but this wasn't so obvious in 2010, and in fact, Bill himself had a wide variation of opinions among his peers as to whether this was the right investment. Tom Banchoff and I and the wonderful teams at Berkeley and Candles, the university, we all took a risk that this was an idea that we could make work. Every professor who has been a Doyle Fellow, who chose to change their courses to better serve students, has taken a risk, and you'll hear from some of them today. And in fact, what it even means to engage difference, to engage and open yourself to somebody who is unlike you, means that you're taking a risk that that engagement might change you. So risk is what we're celebrating here today as we celebrate the 10-year milestone of the Doyle Engaging Difference program. And we are fortunate to have many voices, both present and virtual, to help us do just that. So again, thank you all very much for being here, or for being online watching live stream, or if you're watching this post-live stream, thank you for your engagement as well. So we'd like to begin with just two very brief video clips. The first is from Bill Doyle, that was made in 2010 when the program was established, and then that will be followed by a short clip by President DeGioia celebrating this milestone moment.
Travel has been part of my life, and what I noticed over the years is that as the world got larger, more people, and we were more interconnected, we became less connected in terms of sensitivity to one another. I can't imagine any other school better equipped to take on this subject matter with its students. This program, we're trying to teach people how to deal with their prejudices, how to understand that it's important to have a certain tolerance for other people's point of views. Engaging difference is really what it's all about. And I think if we take the time to think about sometimes what divides us and see if we can overcome that, then we'll find what unites us. We decided that it would be a 3-year test program to see if it really made a difference and if it resonated with students. And it turns out that it did. If we can make a difference in young students attending Georgetown University, if we can make a difference in the way they think about things,
specifically around the issue of conflict,
then I think we've achieved something that could potentially be life-changing for them and make them the best that they can be. And when that happens, you can start to reach your dreams.
As we celebrate this special anniversary of the Doyle Engaging Difference program, I'm honored to have the opportunity to extend our gratitude to Bill and Kathy Doyle for their generous gift and to recognize the tremendous impact of the Doyle program on our Georgetown community. For more than a decade, the Doyle program, under the stewardship of the Center for New Designs and Learning and Scholarship, CANDLES, and the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, has reached hundreds of students and faculty on the Hilltop through a range of initiatives. This work has provided our students and faculty with tools and resources to better address the challenging issues of our time and to engage one another with open-mindedness and civility. The Doyle program's work with faculty has contributed to our ability to prepare our students to become engaged global citizens in an increasingly pluralistic world. The impact of the Doyle program today means that we are better able to respond to the demands of our time, now and in the years to come. As we celebrate the accomplishments of the Doyle Engaging Difference program, issues of civility, dialogue, and inclusion are more important than ever. The legacy of the Doyle program has laid the foundation for the vital work that lies ahead as we bring the Doyle program into its second decade. Bill and Kathy, thank you for being our partners in this important work.
So to echo President DeGioia, today is very much in part about celebrating that vital work that lays the foundation for the important work ahead. And so to help us do that, let me introduce Michelle Onona, who will then introduce our panel who come out of that group of people who have been the Doyle Fellows over the last decade. So Michelle Onona is Assistant Director for Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives at CANDLES and a former Doyle Fellow in her capacity as a faculty member in the Women and Gender Studies program. Michelle co-leads the CANDLES Doyle program. Take it away, Michelle.
Thank you, Randy, and thank you to all of us for being here to celebrate the accomplishments of the Doyle program. So those of you who've participated in the Doyle program know that its true strength is drawn from the community of faculty from which we derive our inspiration and our momentum. And faculty are really at the core of the work at the Doyle program, those who innovate, experiment, design and redesign courses, programs, and projects. Joining us today are 4 such faculty who will share insights from their Doyle and Doyle-adjacent work. So I'm delighted to welcome Derek Goldman, Professor and Chair of the Department of Theater and Performance Studies, who will speak about the In Your Shoes project, which harnesses the power of performance to bring students of diverse backgrounds into dialogue with one another. Joining Derek will be Ijoma Njaka, Senior Program Associate for Equity-Centered Design at the Red House, and Derek's colleague at the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics. And she'll expand on the In Your Shoes project and will speak specifically to an exciting faculty-student pilot of In Your Shoes that has run this past semester as part of the Doyle program. Then we'll have Huaping Liu Adler, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, who will discuss the redesign of her History of Modern Philosophy course, which she undertook as a Doyle Faculty Fellow, in which she interrogated mechanisms of racist and sexist exclusions as a way of problematizing and reimagining the Euro and male-centric history of the philosophy canon. And finally, we'll have Anne Oldenburg, Assistant Director of the Journalism Program and former Doyle Fellow, in addition to being a current participant in our In Your Shoes pilot. So really, Anne has done all of the Doyle things that one can do. She'll be speaking about her Doyle seminar, Media and Social Justice, and will share some of the impactful student work that originated from the course and that was foregrounded in collaborations with DC-based community partners. And we'll conclude with some time for questions from the audience as well. And now I'd like to invite Derek and Ijoma.
Thanks, Michelle and Randy. It's an honor to be here as part of celebrating this 10th anniversary, but as a beneficiary of this decade of work. And by beneficiary, I mean not only programmatic support and the things that we understand make this work happen, but I actually think the biggest legacy of it is an ongoing legacy is the kind of community here that has expanded and grown, that is committed to this work, and sort of the sense of the ecosystem of students and faculty and others who are, as you said, Randy, it wasn't so obvious a decade ago that this was a center, and so much has moved to the center. So just to say that it feels a powerful honor to be here, and I feel still like any time being back in a room, even with people masked, et cetera, with these colleagues who we've been working with to think about pedagogy and to think about difference through these times still feels very fresh and immediate. So just to sort of acknowledge the moment, the importance of the moment. One of my, it's interesting the 10th anniversary because one of my hats is as the founding artistic and executive director of the Lab for Global Performance and Politics, which is a joint initiative between the School of Foreign Service and the college, very deeply aligned in its values with all of this work. I feel like it's all the same thing. And the Lab actually is officially also celebrating its 10th anniversary. So I think whatever was happening 10 years ago and whatever was in the bloodstream, that was of course growing out of things that preceded that. It's a meaningful moment. I'm gonna, I just appreciated, Randy, your centering around the idea of risk in how we encounter and engage each other. I think everything that the In Your Shoes Project, which we'll talk a little bit about, is designed to kind of balance, is related to risk, but also seemingly paradoxically, but critically, the importance of establishing safe, held, trusting spaces with clear terms in which people can feel free to risk. And so there's something about the art of how we do that, how we both protect and nurture and create the spaces where these kinds of critical and risk-taking leaps can happen. And very much what we'll be talking about with In Your Shoes is kind of designed to do that in terms of different applications. I'm gonna share here, just for those of you who may not know In Your Shoes, and we're gonna try not to be redundant, but share here an excerpt from a video from PBS NewsHour that was a kind of overview of one of the In Your Shoes models or applications, just to give a kind of framework. And I'll talk for a few minutes about some things that have been on my mind that feel relevant in this moment in terms of In Your Shoes and the particular approaches to engaging difference, and then hand it over to Ijoma. So here's the video.
In a moment marked by deep political and cultural divides, an innovative program harnesses theater techniques to step into the shoes of others. Jeffrey Brown has the story for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
I made two for you guys.
Two recent college graduates, Maya Smith of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., founded by Jesuits but ecumenically and culturally liberal. Michael Mikey Pozo of Patrick Henry College, a small conservative Christian school about an hour away in Purcellville, Virginia. Different backgrounds and college experiences brought together in an unusual program called In Your Shoes.
Me as a Christian, there are some things that I believe that it's very hard for me to get out there, but I was able to speak freely in that context.
There are so many ways that we could identify how we are different from other people. But what In Your Shoes Project was about was, despite those differences, how could we discover commonality?
But God, why?
The project, in pre-COVID times done in person, uses tools of performance to push people of differing views to not just listen to one another, but to speak the words of the other.
Things may go haywire in the world, but at the very least, you be that spark. You be that joy for others.
You're not really your brain. You're not really your body. You're not even really your heart, your thoughts. It's just like, I don't know. It's just there's so much here, so much there.
Students pair off, are given a prompt or topic, and record their conversation. Next, they swap words. Hear Amira Ali of Georgetown and Anna Allen of Patrick Henry.
I also love freedom. And it depends on how you define freedom. And I feel like we might be losing that.
I did have a thought about the whole cancel culture. I find it so destructive.
I think one of the things that I always love with this work is these moments. You sort of see the self. I think what at heart is what, as I've come to do this work more and more, that is addictive for me about it and feels like it really continues to move me, but also sort of to feel like most resonant, is that it's actively a process of constant discovery. It's not a space where there's a like imparting of held knowledge. It's a space where what you kind of see being presented is the words of people who are carrying around great perspective and insight, but that often don't get fully realized without being put into dialogue in that shared space. And then that gets to be slowed down through this process we call performing one another, but is really just as simple as the words being reflected back. But there's often a comment like, I didn't even know I felt that way. Like it's not like I'm just presenting who I already am. There's an actual process. And one of the beauties are these moments of like, that laugh of Amira's of like, oh, that's me, like you're watching. So I really have loved that about this work. I'll just share briefly about some of the applications and the history. This is work that I had, really developed very organically in collaboration and dialogue with really hundreds of students and fellow artists over many years. And it really started as like classroom and rehearsal techniques about building trust, things that any teacher or any theater director wants to do, or like, how do we get to know each other? So it was exercises rooted in call and response, understanding each other's names, where each other are coming from. And gradually that work got more and more specific and started to move into this kind of pair work where we'd say, have a conversation about your notion of home, and transcribe, curate back a section of your partner's words, transcribe them very precisely, and bring them back to perform them. But even then, for many years, it was like these amazing things would happen in that first week or two, and then we'd move on and do what we were intended to do. And what started to happen is many people I'd worked with would kind of say, that thing that we did, and I think I felt this too, was worthy of further exploration and depth. And so it really, a few years ago, as I started to do this more, I came into contact with Professor Dan Brumberg from Democracy and Governance Studies, and we started to really think about the application of this work in polarized communities. And we had an opportunity to partner with Patrick Henry College and create a pilot there, as you see, and got support from the Transforming the Core Curriculum grant, et cetera, and we're able to do a kind of year-long engagement between Georgetown and Patrick Henry students that really allowed relationships to build in a kind of extraordinary way. And then the second year, we turned it into a full course, and with performances on both campuses the first year, and then shifting to COVID the second year. What's been really exciting since then is not only the deepening of that, but then lots of different and still very surprising to me applications of this work, not only in spaces that, like Georgetown and Patrick Henry, that we think of as two very, very distinct communities, but particularly around engaging the difference that's among us even in other communities. So to cite just an example or two, we're currently have a pilot program with the Initiative on U.S.-China Dialogue. So we're working with a kind of amazing cohort of students, mostly from the Chinese diaspora, who are doing this work. And among that group is incredible diversity, but also an incredible need for a space to have been opened up where they can be sharing voice and perspective about what it means to be them right now in this space and in Washington, D.C. And it's deeply moving. And it's an application when we were doing the Patrick Henry work that I wouldn't, it's different in a different sense of that. And we recently had the privilege as a keynote at the Lannan Symposium of putting together an evening that was somewhat inspired by a course Ijoma and I taught in the summer as part of the SHIP program, where we used Melly Colombe's performance, Here I Am, the GU 272 Descendants solo performance about her relationship to her nine generations of ancestors and what it meant for her to be here at Georgetown, as a catalyst for students to do in your shoes dialogues about their relationship to this campus and to that history, whether it was visible or invisible, how they were inheriting that. So we used that as a prompt for the Lannan Symposium's Beyond Identity, Reimagining the American Narrative, and had a very diverse, interesting group of students, alumni, faculty, and staff in dialogue about really, really hard conversations. And what happens in this work, I feel like, is things get very, very charged. The sort of content, the things that get shared are very personal, but with Ijoma's help, and it really is with Ijoma's enormous help, we've been very, very, I think, intentional about sort of the circles of trust and consent and community guidelines. So certain kinds of conversations can happen among two people that are like, we're just going to leave this here and we're not going to widen it into the group. And others are like, they can happen among the 12 of us. So there's a sort of, but we're not going to widen it further. So kind of a constant sense of checking in as we get deeper and deeper into this work of engaging difference. So I want to, with that, and just with an enormous amount of gratitude for being able to continue to do this work, where I think our biggest, we've had a lot of exciting pilots, and then the thing is to think about like what it means to scale this work and to move it even more into the bloodstream. One of the most exciting things for me has been that there are dozens of people who are now facilitating this work who were once doing the work, former students, alums, et cetera. So how do we imagine different applications? We've been able to do it with medical students who are learning how to listen to patients better, and with social psychologists and others. So I'm going to pass it to Ijoma to talk specifically about whatever she pleases, but also about this exciting faculty-student dialogue around the issue. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ijoma Njaka. As Michelle mentioned in her introductory remarks, I work at the Red House, which is a unit on campus that focuses on curricular innovation, and that's half of my job. The other half of my job is with Derek at the Laboratory for Global Performance and Politics. And before I did that, I just want to shout out that I used to work at Candles as a graduate associate, where my charge was the Doyle program. So I was the Doyle graduate associate for 2 years. It's how I met many of the faculty colleagues that I recognize in this room at Georgetown, and it really was an important professional development experience for me to be able to work with faculty so closely and to see the dedication that so many colleagues were putting into redesigning their courses, and that's certainly encouraged sort of the rest of my career at Georgetown. So thank you all for including me in that. So as Derek mentioned, we have, in terms of the various In Your Shoes pilots that we have, and we've been sort of experimenting with, this past semester, we began a pilot with faculty and students in conversation doing the In Your Shoes process. And so for 4 sessions, we brought 6 students and 6 faculty members together to build community, and then to also have pair conversations, particularly at the intersection of teaching and learning and sort of the classroom at Georgetown. One thing that I've found to be incredibly important just throughout my entire career in education is to, understand that obviously faculty are experts in teaching and learning in their own way, but obviously so are our students who are on campus and are experiencing the classroom. And one thing that has been that we've sort of noticed was missing was this opportunity for faculty and students to talk together about teaching. Part of the reason why we were able to run this pilot, I say we, in part of my work, I continue to work with the Doyle program with my colleagues, Michelle and Ryan. We spent, once the sort of at the start of the pandemic, so starting in fall 2020, we began running virtually the Doyle Conversation Series on anti-racism in higher education. As I'm sure folks recall, in sort of that time, there was clearly a lot of sort of re-energized interest in racial justice work, particularly in higher education. And so we wanted to respond to that need through conversation spaces about anti-racism in higher ed. One thing that was important to us as we started that process was making sure that we had faculty, staff, and students all together in conversation. And so we wanted to make sure that we cultivated that community, but also engaged sort of folks from those various perspectives and those levels of expertise into what we were trying to achieve. And so since then, we've done 10 of these conversations. We've had really high engagement and great turnout. We've sort of done a couple of different iterations, sometimes with guest speakers, sometimes with pre-readings, and always an opportunity to have folks sort of come in with, honest, sharing sort of what's on their mind, what they're bringing into the space, but also bringing questions and sort of opportunities to talk with others and from folks who are situated differently on campus in order to bring that to that space. And so because we had had so many of these successful conversations, that was part of why we knew that it would be possible to try this In Your Shoes pilot with faculty and students. We had seen a number of faculty and students in conversation with one another already, and we wanted to see what would happen if we invited folks to deepen that process. I'm very excited to say that we had a really, I think it went well. As Michelle mentioned, some of our colleagues in here participated in that process. But what was exciting to me, about working with faculty and students in this way is, what often happens when Derek and I are doing In Your Shoes work, which is, folks they'll find something that interests them in what someone's shared with them. And that's sort of what motivates their excerpting of a piece of text that they want to share with their partner. But what happens after that, there's a reaction process, and we're able to sort of facilitate conversation based off of what folks bring into the space. And so to see, students sort of have a different level of cognizance about what their professors are bringing into the classroom, or to hear different student perspectives about pedagogy, about teaching, that were brought up in this way, was something that I found incredibly rewarding and found really to be really exciting. And so I'm just very grateful that we've been able to test that out, to also sort of initiate not only this In Your Shoes pilot, but also the conversation series, particularly related to the Doyle work. Again, just sort of based off of my history with Doyle, I knew that this was possible, and so I'm glad that we've been able to sort of work on engaging difference, engaging risk, and sort of creating spaces for that in a variety of ways. So thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Do I have my slides? Oh, okay, great. Okay, I'll come back to this title later. Thank you all for coming. Let me give you a little bit context here. So our philosophy majors have to fulfill 2 history requirements, and not just at Georgetown, it's also elsewhere, this situation I'm about to describe. So these history requirements have to be fulfilled by 2 classes, exactly 2 of them. One is ancient and medieval philosophy. The other is early modern philosophy, mainly 17th and 18th century philosophy. They cannot fulfill these requirements by taking all these other classes that my department also has the capacity to offer on a regular basis. I want to add a bit of good news. I'm not here criticizing my department. My department is one of the most progressive philosophy departments out there. So the good news is that we've recently had a conversation, and we decided that we're going to move away from this model and open up the history requirements to all these other classes to make things a lot more interesting and diverse for our students. But the philosophy as a profession still has a long, long way to go. So here, this presentation is really directed as a professional philosophy as a whole. Okay, so I'm the dedicated expert on early modern philosophy in my department. The canon I was brought up on consists exactly 7 men. The top left are the 3 so-called rationalists, and the bottom 3 are 3 so-called empiricists, and Immanuel Kant, whose philosophy I specialize in, is supposed to be the greatest synthesizer of all. So the whole history points to the great Immanuel Kant. Okay, all right. Over the last couple of decades, some scholars have realized that this is really problematic. So they decided to expand the canon by including women. Here I give you a partial list of some of the women I included in my syllabi in the past, and I would like to thank Doyle and Michelle. I don't know whether James is here. Yujima as well. I worked with that team when I first tried out the expansion approach. And so the problem, then it dawned on me that the expansion approach has its own limitations, very serious limitations. First of all, every time you add a woman to the canon, people ask you to give justification. You don't have to justify the canon. Ask why those guys are here. But every time you add a woman, it's like, are you including her? Is she original? Is she doing good philosophy and things like that? It's exhausting. It's extra cognitive labor you have to perform, and it's unfair. The demand of justification is unfair. Worse still, when you play the game of justification, you also have the risk of inadvertently making those women mere footnotes to men, because you are tacking them on to the existing canon. So the second problem is that when you try to include someone to the existing canon, there's always this question of on whose terms. Here we run up against the constraints of canonic concepts and questions. Sometimes the women don't get included because they're interested in different questions, because they had different lived experiences, so they philosophized differently. So how do you include them when the men were not interested in their questions, right? So the third question is that we all know we only have 15 weeks of instruction time. Plus, sometimes we want to give students a couple of days off. No, not really. But anyways, I'm just saying that the instruction time is limited. You can only go so far in terms of inclusion. So you can never be inclusive enough. Also, the flip side of inclusion is exclusion. Every time you decide to include someone, you're always excluding someone else. So finally, and this is something that concerns me most, is that no matter how far you go in being inclusive, in the end, so long as this expansion approach builds on the existing canon, which is completely Eurocentric, the end product is still Eurocentric. We're still adding European women. So even though the class is called History of Modern Philosophy, it's not called History of Western Philosophy. It's called History of Philosophy, period. It pretends to be universal. Okay, now, so my epiphany is that forget about inclusion. I'm just going to talk about exclusion. So I decided, okay, let me just ask the question, how did the exclusion take place in the first place? Why did I have to deal with this problem of having to include? So how did we get here in the first place? So I decided to turn the entire class of what I call History of Western Philosophy as a history of exclusions. Just to give you an example, so I mostly focus on race and gender-based exclusions. So the Enlightenment era is also an era in which the philosophers designed and worked out very elaborate systems of exclusion, mechanisms of exclusion. There are multiple logics of exclusion. And so now my class focuses on shedding light on the logics of exclusion. So here I just give you an example, one of the examples. So here you get a list of celebrated Enlightenment thinkers. There are Francis Bacon, Robert Boyle from the 17th century, and Georges Buffon and Johann Blumenbach from 18th century. So these figures, they are celebrated philosophers of nature. They're called natural philosophers. When I teach them, cover them these days, I want to emphasize the fact that they all philosophized against the context of colonialism and race-based chattel slavery. And a lot of them actually were directly involved in colonialism and benefited from slave trade, for example. So I wanted to kind of uncover these kind of facts and see how they philosophized against the context of colonialism and slavery, racial slavery. And these particular figures, they all, in their own ways, contributed to the racial classification that we still suffer from. And they all contributed to the formation of recognizably modern racist ideology. And my hero, Kant, played actually especially important role in this regard. And he is typically celebrated as this great moral philosopher. What is less known outside of Kant's scholarship is that he was also a great natural philosopher. And in that particular role, he invented the modern concept of race, the scientific concept of race. I actually recently wrote a book. So for anyone who wanted to argue with me about that one in scholarship, I just point them to my book. So anyways, I wanted to highlight this particular aspect of history, how these celebrated Enlightenment thinkers did all of that. And more to the point of my class design and to my criticism of Eurocentric history philosophy is that Kant actually played a very important role in the formation of the canon we have today. So as a matter of fact, historians before Kant, the majority of them thought that philosophy started in the East, either in India or in Egypt. They basically debated with each other, is it India, is it Egypt? Nobody actually said, well, it's actually here. No, Kant then got involved, and he said, no, could not have started in the East. True philosophy could only have started with the Greeks. Why? Because the so-called Orientals are incapable of forming abstracts or principles, abstract concepts or principles required for true philosophizing. Hi, Kant. Anyways, okay, all right. So Kant also constructed this narrative that his own philosophy, so-called critical philosophy, is supposed to be the end or aim of history. So this framework was the foundation of the canon that we have. So if once I uncover the story this way, you'll get a sense that the canon is completely contingent, right? In the end, I can trace it as to the Kantian construction, and to me, it's nothing short of an ideology. So now back to my title. Hopefully haven't run out of time too much. But anyway, so this last slide. I thank Michelle for giving me this name, this title, Classroom as Site of Intervention. How wonderful! Thank you, Michelle. So I think it really captures the Doyle spirit so well. So the reason I want to teach history of philosophy this way now is that I want my students to study history of philosophy as a liberatory practice. When we understand the past better, we also understand our present better. So I want my students to study the past to better understand the present, not to inadvertently perpetuate ideologies. And I have many inspirations, and one of the inspirations is this passage from James Baldwin, which is one of my favorite passages. I'll just read the highlighted part. The great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, are unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and history is literally present in all that we do. So I think especially, I want to highlight the fact that I'm not white. And I think it's really important and especially, I look pretty obvious. I look like generic Asian. So as you can kind of understand that over the last couple of years, it hasn't been easy for us Asians, right? And so there's this anti-Asian hate incidents and things like that. For me, this is like my truth and reconciliation with the racist history that brought us to this racial thinking today. And so this particular understanding is very liberatory to me. And I want my students to understand, if not like share my particular experience, I want them to understand that we can do history differently in a way that's empowering, that's liberating. Thank you.
Definitely want to take that class and buy the book. All right, so let's see. My course, Media and Social Justice, was new for the journalism department, new for me. I considered it an exploration, sorry, I guess I'll take this off, an exploration into new territories, and I was determined with it being media and social justice that it be engaging and that we take a risk, those words we've heard a lot today. It had two main components. I guess we'll get to that. The first one was a collaboration with Street Sense, which is a local media organization here in DC dedicated to using a range of media platforms to raise awareness and spotlight solutions to homelessness in our community. And I'd been in touch with the executive director there, and I knew some of our students who were minoring in journalism had done internships there in the past. So I thought there must be a way for this course to be involved with that group. The executive director, Eric Valcaro, who left at the end of the year, suggested that it would be best for us to be involved in what they call their annual news blitz in October on World Homeless Day. And this is when several organizations in the area agree to publish a piece or air a television segment having to do with homelessness on that day. And so we thought about what we could do as a class to help, and he thought a media analysis of the project was the first place to start. So students got together, got into groups, we analyzed the past 5 years of the Blitz, looking at what they covered, how they covered it, and then on the day of the Blitz this October, we were involved in monitoring social media. A couple of students actually went to an encampment to talk to people about the Blitz to gauge awareness of it, and the students came up with recommendations for what could be done better next time around. And then one student took the lead on writing, and essentially we came up with what was this analysis, more of a white paper, if you will, but it was really, I was really proud of the students because they put a lot of time and effort into it, thought about what they could suggest. And one of the most notable recommendations that they came up with was including more voices of those living with homelessness. When you think about journalism, one of the tenets is to give voice to the voiceless. And while policy pieces are important, that piece of it seemed to be missing. They also suggested including more audio and video pieces and writing stories in other languages. So they brought a lot to the media analysis, and I was happy and proud for them. And I'm also happy to say that we are going to work again with Street Sense in the fall to come up with, I'm not sure if we're going to do an analysis again, but we want to be involved in some way. We liked how that worked. The second main component of the course was this idea of immersive journalism, or being embedded with a group. It's something I've been wanting to do, and how do you do that? You know, you think of journalists being embedded in wartime in years past. They're actually on the scene. How could we do that with a classroom like this? And I also wanted to focus a bit on something called solutions journalism, which is not writing puff pieces, but rather in journalism, you know, we write about crime, or we write about a fire, we write about things that are happening, but we don't always look at solutions or ways to make it better. And solutions journalism does exactly that. So as students found communities to embed themselves with, one of the pieces was solutions journalism. So I liked also how many journalistic outlets will do a scrolling feature like this. And so Story Maps, the Story Maps tool, was a great way for students to present it right off the bat. And that worked out well. It also enabled them to build so that their projects, each assignment could be at the top and then build on the way, all the way through to a final story map presentation. The projects ranged from things focusing on Georgetown campus, like our Pivot program, the Safe Food Equity program, to this idea of communities in other ways. Empowering women, a group empowering women was one of the communities. Another student tackled the Filipino community in DC and wound up writing some wonderful pieces about a nurses group there. And this one that I'm showing was Carrie O'Donnell is from Maine and knows this small island, and she wrote about the threats to the island with modernization and turned it into a fellowship. She'll be spending the summer there collecting oral histories and I hope wind up with a nice long-form piece of journalism, maybe for the Atlantic or somewhere, looking at island life and how these islands are coping with the modern world's encroachment. A couple of other ones I just want to mention briefly. The DC Peace Team by Anne Marie Cuccia. She spent time, and this is what I meant by the various assignments at the top. The first one was just an analysis of the community. The second one was a profile of a person. The third was more about education. There was a piece also about a cultural piece, because we had a wonderful writer from San Francisco who writes about food from a very social justice standpoint, and where's the food from, and who's paying for it, and why are we paying what we're paying for it. Really educational for all of us. And so that was another piece that students did. This one, Nova Friends of Refugees, by a non-journalism student, but she got so involved with the group. She was going to their soccer games and helping out with their the board that they put together. This was right when many Afghan refugees were arriving in our area. And finally, another one was Cycling the Streets. Jem Dyson wanted to hang out with this bike group, and at first it seemed like, well, that was just about recreation. Where's the social justice component? But it became about much more than that, because the group grew from 15 to 1,500 and toured Black-owned businesses in DCs, and it became much more about the Black community and what happened during the pandemic. She profiled someone who talked about mental health aspects. She rode with them on a Halloween ride, a Unity ride that they did. She created maps, took photos, wound up spending a lot of time with the group. And ultimately, the final piece that all of the students did was an op-ed, kind of looking back at how the community was working, what they felt about it. And she, in fact, wrote a very poignant piece about how this is a space where Blackness has not historically thrived, but she found that it was thriving in this community. So all of the projects were intended to be multimedia. Students got audio, they got video. They wrote these long story maps, as I said, and some of them wound up being published in campus publications as well. So I was really, really thankful to Ryan and to Michelle, to the Doyle program, because I started out thinking this would be one kind of course, and it wound up being so much richer, so much better, because of their sort of helping me to shape it and considering so many of the Doyle ideas. So I hope I haven't done really all of the Doyle things, because I'd hate to not be involved. It's a wonderful program.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'll also just say that we love repeat Doyle participants. Absolutely, absolutely. So audience, we are now at our Q&A time, so feel free to formulate your own questions, and I'll just get us started by asking you all a question about student impact. You know, because of grading and calendars and other things, it's very easy for us to think of our impact on students in terms of semesters. And I'm curious if any of you have reflections or thoughts on what the longer-standing impact has been of your work with students.
Well, I know for me, I'll start out. Several of the students went on to get internships at Street Sense, which I thought was great. The class is full again for fall, so I guess that's a good thing. And again, we're doing another collaboration. So I think there actually is tangible aspects, impacts happening. So I feel good about that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's just really moving hearing everybody's it's not surprising, but all of the different intersectional ways that our work is connected is always inspiring. I think the most gratifying thing about the work we've been doing is how it feels like it's really about a kind of muscle building, and it's a muscle building, you know, empathy gets used a lot. I think it has some limitations in the way we're using it now, but that actually there are aspects of learning listen differently, to notice the world differently, to be empowered. And it's like anything else. It's like if you actually are put in situations where you've been given time and space to do it, you find yourself returning to it and having different skills and agency in other settings. And as we, one of, I guess, the benefits of like aging in this work or something is starting to be like, wow, I remember the first time we were in a circle and that student, was shy about sharing their name in that exercise, and now they're facilitating the work in the community. And that's happening quite a lot with it. And I think it's not something, that happens in normal academic rhythms or with benchmarks in the traditional way. It's really life practice. And, that's, as the adage goes, we become the students to our students as they take this on. And I think we've seen that happening in this work.
Yeah, and I'll add, one thing that one of my something that I'm interested in, is around arts education and sort of the work that we hope that art can do. And I think a lot of it is around, people have an experience. There's something that's exciting to them about a piece of art, and that ends up sort of shifting how they see something in the world sort of fundamentally. And as Derek was saying, that doesn't really happen on a set timetable. But what excites me about this work is that we know, that I'm hoping that, particularly with our students who are having conversations with faculty or with sort of colleagues at another institution, what happens when, they'll encounter something out in the world that'll remind them of something that they experienced. They're like, oh yes, I have to think about this differently because I remember I had this conversation with somebody. It's about sort of cultivating those experiences that help shift perspectives, which I think is really exciting. And, I also don't know how that will change our students, but I know that the impact is there. Because the students, at least, they share that with us.
So for my class, I forgot to thank Ryan. So thank you so much, Ryan. Ryan really did a lot of work helping me to kind of think through the syllabus and also the pedagogical aspect, which I always appreciate. I think my view is that these days is that it doesn't matter what you teach. It doesn't matter what you teach, but it matters more how you teach it. I think Doyle really has helped me to think about my teaching this way. I actually never loved teaching until I started working with Doyle, which is literal truth. If you want to fall in love with teaching, well, probably here is preaching to the choir. But if you want to convince any colleague to fall in love with teaching, working with Doyle. But anyways, so I feel like this, of course, it's hard to measure impact. I can only gather from my students' reactions in real time. And I think this connects with Derek's point about agency. So teaching history this way, for the first time, allows me to kind of center the idea of agency. So typically, a history class, students expect to sit there and listen to, read a bunch of dead text and listen to, some lecture or something like that. Instead, I emphasize how we can bring our lived experience to bear, just like historically, all these philosophers, they philosophized in the context of their own, their own world. I want my students to see how their lived experience can be understood through some of the language they used. So, so this last time I taught this class, for the first time ever, every single student brought their lived experience to bear. Everybody, probably 2 or 3 weeks through after class, the semester started, basically everybody knew who everybody is, sexual orientation, everything, it's like, and I just emphasized vulnerability because the first day I told them, I feel very vulnerable these days as Asian. And then, they all opened up, and once the students opened up this way, whatever text you threw at them, they'll read something interesting out of it. So I just want to say, the importance of centering the agency, there.
These are all such beautiful takeaways, the vulnerability and the aspect of encounter and practice that are such a part of learning and teaching. Do we have any questions from the audience? And if not, I can definitely take up one of those parts. Oh, we do. A microphone is coming. Yes,
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you all so much. This has been really inspiring, and I know it's going to continue to be inspiring. I wanted to ask about, I think one of the trickiest things about inclusion and equity and anti-racist teaching is that you never fully arrive. You're not done. You talked about it's impossible to be inclusive enough. Talk about scaling up, it's always could be scaled up more. So how do you coach yourself through the fact that you're always in process and not arriving?
A lofty question.
It's a great question. I mean, I think one of the benefits of working in performance is that we name it a lot, because there's a kind of constant, in a way, built in, something. Before I was doing this work, I was talking about process, not process, not product. There aren't beginnings and endings. Everything is catalytic. Everything is iterative. That's really woven in some ways to performance practice, even though we have, yes, there are productions that close, or things like that. But there's this sense of that's a little, so I feel like that is helpful in some ways to this work. But I think the other thing I would say is I think we have, like, if we're going to talk about risk, as Randy sort of framed things with, we ourselves have to be attuned to the kind of size and scale of like reckonings that may come. If we're genuine about opening the space for dialogue around difficult questions societally, then we have to be real about how hard those are to address, and not be like, and we're done, and we check the box again, and really be ready to hear things that we, that as an institution, that we might not have wanted to hear or might not know how to grapple with next, be comfortable with silence or with quiet or with the vulnerability or uncertainty of where do we go from here. And that's where I think the muscles that all these things are, is like sort of in a way where I feel like we're not just teaching content, we're teaching ways of acknowledging that the world is filled with, a lot that's unknowable and a lot that's overwhelming, and we're trying to form coalitions and communities to sort of like encounter it together. And there's self-practice in that too, of being like, okay, this is really hard, and that's good. Not everything's going to feel victorious in the obvious ways as you're moving through those processes without endings.
I emphasize, I guess, the three things, like bigger principles. One is that I always put in my syllabus that this is a brave space. I kind of add this poem, right, brave space, and just encourage my students to make it very clear up front that I think Randy's point about risk is really important. We're all here taking risk, and unless you take a risk or, run up to our discomfort, then we don't learn. So I think making that clear up front is very helpful. The second is that Anna and I were talking about this before the event started. These days I emphasize that every view is a view from somewhere. And so that's actually the title of my book, and turned out to be a title of a journalist book as well. And so I always try to remind myself, what is the standpoint from which I'm looking at things? And I encourage my students to kind of understand their own standpoint. This is like consciousness raising, right, for everyone. And then the third one is that I guess that's connected to the issue of vulnerability. I really try to help my students to develop a language to understand their own emotional reactions to things, be it like, the desire to cancel someone. So instead of like having this moralizing conversation, I just say to my students, like, don't feel ashamed, or if you do, ask yourself why, right? And just be able to kind of be able to have the language to understand your emotional reactions to this very confusing world, and be compassionate toward yourself and toward others. And I feel like once I have these ingredients in the classroom, then we all have this great opportunity to learn about our own blind spots, because we all feel comfortable about teaching each other and learning from each other without feeling ashamed of anything. Just be there and grow, and actually form community as well. So these kind of things, I think, for me, they have worked quite well. And of course, I'm still processing.
That's the key, though. I don't think you stop. I don't think you ever do really arrive, as you said. And for journalism, we have to keep asking questions. We have to keep talking about this. Me Too wouldn't have happened, if we hadn't kept asking the questions and kept pressing on the topics that needed to be talked about. And we're certainly not done with that. I know in our course, too, for students, they were interested in trauma-informed reporting. What's the best way to speak to people who are in these vulnerable populations? Also, race reporting. We did a session with somebody from NPR on that, and it was wonderful. And I think just talking about how do you approach these subjects, how do you talk about these things, was hugely beneficial. And by no means done, but you learn to simply ask, help me understand you. Even one question in terms of going out into the field and trying to report on these topics becomes really important.
Yeah, just to jump in terms of, the work of sort of anti-racist praxis sort of never being done, I think one thing that I think about are the ways, kind of to borrow a little bit from what Derek said about sort of creating something catalytic. I don't, I hope when, if I'm sort of teaching something or leading people in an In Your Shoes workshop, I hope I explain it well, but I also never know what people are going to bring back. And because of that, I don't know what they're going to do after they share that work. I don't know what's going to happen when they go out in the world. I just don't know. But I try to find that encouraging. And, I try to hope that what might happen is that someone gets, really excited about something and maybe it shifts sort of their perspective towards justice, towards anti-racism. And so that's how I tend to comfort myself in those moments when I'm trying to think about, the work never being done.
Wow, thank you. Right, I mean, we often point to the risk-taking inherent in learning, and there's so much of that we have to shoulder and work through as educators. I think we have time maybe for one last question or comment from the audience, if there's anyone who wants to jump in. Yes, no, but go ahead.
No, go ahead, the question.
Oh, it was Daniela right here in the second row. Sorry.
Thank you all for your insights and sharing all of your practices. I was just trying to figure out how, or if you have any suggestions on how to bring Doyle more, like, across the campus. I think that when I did Doyle, I noticed that there were some departments, schools that weren't represented as much. And I was just wondering what you would say to your colleagues across campus who may not understand what a great program it is, and how to really encourage others to, to do Doyle and to engage in difference.
Well, Hwapping's bringing endorsement
Absolutely.
of falling in love with teaching. I mean, that's maybe.
I think if I may, so I'm part of the main campus executive faculty, and one thing we've been talking a lot about is the merit review. And I would just do very practical thing. If you really want to encourage departments to send more faculty members, incentivize them. Because get rewarded, really. Like, this is a lot of work. And often when you do Doyle work, you also do extra emotional and cognitive labor. And often this attracts the type of persons, but I would love to be recognized more and rewarded more. I think diversity talk is empty without financial incentive, to be honest, rewards. And it would just need more money. To be honest, sorry, I'm very honest. I'm straight shooter in this regard. I'll just say it. Just add this line when you do the merit review. Make sure that Doyle is included as one of the examples of extra work that you invest in teaching. So there you go.
That's a great suggestion.
I think in addition to that, I think one of the things that seems really promising to me, and I think we're all a little bit like, pandemic silver linings, were those supposed to be real? Like, what are the but is that we have gotten more nimble and adaptive in certain ways that I feel like build on innovations that were already starting to happen on this campus around different kinds. Like, not everything is a 3 credit class? Like, what does it mean to bring people together 4 times, students and faculty, across disciplines for 3 intensive hours to learn a skill or trade and then see a performance and talk, like finding, and I think it's challenging for an institution like this with different disciplines and fields and, just like we have to teach this in order to prepare the students to sort of be equally adaptive and open. And I think investing resources in that, Randy is a visionary thinker in these ways, truly. We know this in terms of like the sort of like, what if we do this? And I've learned so much from him in that way. But I think trying to build those kinds of, adaptive models that make it easier for those who might appear resistant but just don't have an easy way to say yes because of the institutional challenges and bureaucracies, to be like, oh, 6 students for 3 hours, like we can do that. And then that opens a door to be like, that was amazing, like 18 students for 2 weeks or whatever. And I think, I think the investing that's going into that kind of thinking, and for all of us, it's hard to find ourselves together in rooms and spaces. So even these spaces make me go, oh, right, like more ways to do this together in different configurations.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for giving us a glimpse into your work, and thank you for being our partners in this work, and looking forward to many more collaborations into the next decade. Thank you. Thank you.
So we thought that we would conclude the program by getting just an outside perspective of somebody who could help kind of elevate and open up and shine light, looking back and looking forward, as we were saying. And the person that I'm going to introduce is appropriate both because she has a wonderful Georgetown connection, but also the position that she's recently been promoted into feels like it's a kind of harbinger of the future of where this work sits in universities. So it's really with great pleasure that I'm going to introduce Jennifer Rosales, who is the inaugural executive director of the Center for Engaged Pedagogy. She provides academic leadership and vision for teaching and learning in the Center for Engaged Pedagogy at Barnard College, guiding and expanding the college's commitment to inclusive and engaged pedagogy. She strengthens Barnard's culture of pedagogy by developing new teaching and learning initiatives, diverse learning contexts, and opportunities for interdisciplinary collaboration. Previously, Jennifer was the Director of Research and Evaluation here at Georgetown for the Center for Social Justice, where she conducted research on social justice issues, arts, community engagement, and education. I had the pleasure of working with Jennifer when she was here. It was bittersweet when she moved on, but it's just fantastic to see the progress of your career and the influence you're having elsewhere. We couldn't be more delighted to have you here to bring some perspective on this event.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you all for welcoming me back to Georgetown. I'd especially like to thank Randy, Michelle, Ryan, and Jocelyn for inviting me, as well as the panelists today and the larger Doyle community. I learned so much listening to the inventive, thoughtful, and engaging approaches each of you have taken with your courses or projects. It's such an honor to be here to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Doyle Engaging Difference program. In all honesty, I had just been accepted into the Doyle Faculty Fellow program to redesign my Justice and Peace Studies course before I embarked on my previous role as the director for the Center for Engaged Pedagogy at Barnard College. In many ways, I was shifting the scope of my work that I thought I would do for the course within the Doyle program to my new role at a teaching and learning center. The possibilities intrinsic in the title for the Center for Engaged Pedagogy, or CEP, alone excited me. Engaged pedagogy. What is engaged pedagogy? Renowned scholar, activist Bell Hooks, in her book, Teaching to Transgress, provides a definition that I'm showing on the screen now. Engaged pedagogy really transforms education into a collaborative, holistic practice of knowledge cultivation that redefines what teaching and learning can mean. At the CEP, we explore the possibilities of education as an active process through which students and faculty can experience mutual growth and empowerment and establish meaningful relationships between their class material and daily lives, like the example we heard from Njoma earlier today. In many ways, I was building this center with and for Barnard faculty, staff, and students that held at its core principles that are embodied in the Doyle Fellows Program, and I have heard shared in today's presentations. Inclusion, experimentation, or risk-taking, action, connection, challenge, and wholeness. I assume many of you in the audience here can think of your own examples within your own teaching that further these principles. Enacting these principles have become more essential and sometimes more challenging in the last few years. For faculty, students, and academic staff around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a prolonged moment of rupture and necessary reevaluation during the transition to online and hybrid teaching and learning, and in some circumstances, a back and forth between modalities. Simultaneously, the Black-led and multiracial uprisings against state violence in summer of 2020 after the brutal murder of George Floyd led to a significant number of universities and colleges publishing statements describing their commitments to dismantling racism and redesigning their efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Within the classroom, we see these explicit commitments to inclusion, access, and anti-racist inquiry, as well as intentional efforts to approach course design and teaching strategies with and through anti-oppressive frameworks and lenses. And so the 3 engaged learning sites for change being highlighted today, classroom and course transformation, dialogue, and experiential learning, are situated within this context as we approach teaching with diversity, equity, and inclusion lenses. I will provide some thoughts on each of these areas, the first being dialogue. When teaching across difference, classes delve into controversial subject matter, including issues that are garnered social concern and topics that ferment disagreement and discord. We heard great examples today from Derek and Ijoma of how specific tools from theater and arts education can be used to help foster dialogue and build trust with one another. In addition to these tools, we also heard about how we have to develop the necessary conditions for productive discourse in the classroom. Facilitating dialogue about difference and power is not easy. There is a level of vulnerability required for instructors and students in the room because of students' invisible and visible relationships to different forms of oppression. At Barnard, we refer to the learning environment as a brave space, as Hopping said earlier today, not a safe space. This doesn't mean that other spaces on campus shouldn't be safe, but that learning requires pushing beyond the boundaries of comfort, normalizing difficulty, distinguishing between people and their ideas, clarifying that the purpose of dialogue is mutual understanding, not winning a debate or convincing everyone to agree, and acknowledging intent and impact. A brave space allows learners to engage with one another and have conversations with honesty, sensitivity, respect, and generosity, while acknowledging that discomfort is part of learning. As instructors, we are eager for the space to emerge, but must construct it actively with our students. These topics of social concern stretch students intellectually, can be affectively and emotionally charged, and impacts people's social connectedness, sense of belonging, and trust. Constructing the conditions for students to speak in draft mode, to offer an opinion that diverges from the majority, to share personal connections to subject matter, and to be open to learning material that may conflict with what they know, believe, and experience outside the classroom requires professors to frame course content thoughtfully, as Derek stated. Australian education scholar Sharon Stein proposes 3 sets of conditions professors should account for to support inclusive classrooms for difficult conversations to flourish. The intellectual, affective, and relational conditions. Many of us think about the intellectual conditions first. What prior learning might students or I need to engage with with the material to develop these skills? But perhaps less obvious sometimes are these affective and relational conditions. Stein pushes us to ask, for example, when designing your syllabus, to ask yourself, How do you honor expertise while making room for different forms of knowledge? I think Anne gave us some great examples of that. Preemptively asking yourself what anxieties, insecurities, fears, and assumptions might be related to thinking across difference. I think we saw examples of that too today. And how do we create a community of learners that are accountable to one another and the material you want to share in class? Setting up discussions by using a set of community agreements, as Derek said earlier, that are co-created with students or contributed to by students in the class at the beginning of a term helps set the stage. When constructing these agreements, remind students that college is a time to move beyond echo chambers where socialization only happens with folks who share the same opinions. A class can be a place where we break down some of the polarization that is taking place in our national and global political environments by having discernible, respectful, and accountable dialogue. Asking students what commitments they're willing to make and what commitments they need from each other. To have open and honest discussion helps everyone take responsibility and practice awareness of the conditions necessary for that conversation. Creating transitions out of difficult dialogue is also an important way to ensure individuals are processing their learning and corresponding feelings. Giving students time to free write and reflect on the conversation at the end of class meeting creates the conditions to support class community building through individual processing. I'm now going to shift the conversation to experiential learning, which was one of the Doyle's other areas of focus. Experiential learning, or learning by connecting conceptual understanding and experimentation to concrete activity and reflection, can happen in a myriad of ways within courses, from community-based learning, that I know the Center for Social Justice is very active in, to the Capital Applied Learning Labs known as CALL here at Georgetown. Anne Oldenburg's course demonstrates experiential learning in many ways. It moves students beyond the gates of campus and into the, quote, real world, end quote. Andrea Whistler, the executive director of Georgetown Center for Social Justice, always cautions against the separation between the classroom and the real world. The classroom exists in the real world, even when virtual, and I would argue that became even more apparent in the last few years as faculty have been literally teaching from their bedrooms with surprise cameos from cats and children. As I think back on the last couple of years for experiential learning during the pandemic, I think there were three intertwined takeaways. First, as we've heard today, experiential learning has the potential to exist in a third space. Referring to Homi Bhabha's third space theory, new possibilities for more equitable futures can be interrogated, negotiated, and reflected upon in hybrid locations between the virtual and the physical, home and school, theorist and practitioner. It is in these liminal yet productive spaces that social constructs of boundaries and roles become more perceptible because they are no longer taken for granted. I think even just witnessing the PBS doc from Derek, we were able to see that today. Second, while virtual learning helps connect people in geographically distant places, I think it also enables instructors to connect the course material to students' own communities. Students were asked to examine, research, and share how course material connected to their lives to help get to know one another and secure connection between courses. For example, I worked with an environmental science professor who taught a large intro lecture online in which she connected her assignments to the students' locations, from nature observation videos to doing research on materials in their own closets. Learning more, differently, and deeper about one's own community not only helps with motivation, connection, and relationship building, but it also helps deter from the voyeurism that can happen in experiential learning courses in which students from one community conduct research on another without the thoughtful preparation and training necessary to conduct that work. My last point on experiential learning is that I think between the pandemic and the greater efforts to support racial justice in the classroom, the line between the real world and the classroom has gotten even murkier. Or as Andrea Whistler points out, maybe it never really existed. So I asked, what if all learning could be experiential? Sure, some course material is better suited for this type of learning than other, but as my colleague Erica Kitzmiller, Assistant Professor of Education at Barnard College, and I recently put together some of the principles from action-oriented learning to invite more instructors to think about how this type of learning is taking place or could take place in their courses. This is by no means exhaustive, but it can help guide changes to lesson plans, assignments, and transform an entire class. I think in Anne's class, you can see from the beginning place-based examples to the end of sharing public scholarship from her students. For the last 10 years, Doyle Fellows have been transforming their courses to be more inclusive. These transformations include content being taught, so for example, the deliberative effort to incorporate critical understandings of race, gender, religion, disability, and class into syllabi, and connecting that material to the objectives of the course. And it can also include how course material is being taught, as Hopping said earlier today. Fellows have used DEI lenses to design a course, assignment, assessment, rubric, or class discussion. Hopping did a great job demonstrating for us through her course design and her use of the classroom as a site of intervention, the challenges to Western philosophy canon and the discipline at large, which is really incredible. As more and more instructors are making efforts to construct courses with DEI and anti-racist lenses, different considerations are coming to the fore that I think instructors need to be mindful of as they design their courses that often create tensions between suggested practices. I'd like to touch on 3 of these considerations: elite capture, centering burdening students of color, and critique fatigue. Building on one of the previous principles that I named, in which the aims is to generate knowledge with and for people beyond elite spaces, I want to share Olufemi Taiwo's Being in the Room privilege. I think he's a professor here at Georgetown. His essay grapples with the norms that distribute conversational authority and attention in social justice spaces, and considers how the very gestures meant to uplift marginalized voices, like passing the mic and centering, often produce new problems such as elite capture, when a group's most advantaged people maintain political control and resources. He suggests that an overwhelming focus on regulating behaviors between rooms, which is often suggested in DEI spaces, can keep us from questioning the construction of the room in the first place, the relationships to rooms we've never entered, and how to build more equitable rooms collectively. In addition to framing and setting guidelines for classroom, another common anti-racist pedagogy approach includes drawing from students' lived experiences to center students' expertise from marginalized backgrounds. This connects to my earlier example of how students connect course material to their own communities. And while this is a productive practice, it can also lead to placing a significant burden on students of color and others with marginalized identities to have to share their experiences of oppression. My colleague at Barnard, Alex Pittman, developed a community of practice with 10 undergrad students to approach this question. What happens when classes that center narratives of racial marginalization thrust students of color into the position of teaching their experiences of oppression to others? Together, this community of practice created an online resource to examine this question. They titled the resource Centering/Burdening to prompt readers to reflect on how, when, and with what effects inclusive and exploitative practices come into uneasy contact with each other. In this regard, the title gestures towards the ambiguous and shifting relationship between the value of centering narratives of marginalization and the effect of burdening people as living examples of such narratives in the practice of anti-oppressive education. After reading material together, the community of learners provided advice for instructors and fellow students on belonging and non-belonging, student power and privilege, instructors' positions, and the power and caring practices of teaching. Students' relationship to course material will differ depending on their own lived experience and identities. And while there are suggested practices on how instructors can get to know their students better and plan their courses accordingly, one must acknowledge that teaching across difference is not purely a cognitive exercise. Students have emotional relationships to the course material and peer engagement as it relates to their lives and the larger political social context in which they engage. One of the challenges I've witnessed in the last few years has preceded this time is critique fatigue. In teaching on structural racism, class, health, education, immigration, and the environment, to name a few, course content can get organized in a way that leads students to question their own agency or reasoning for social action as well as create victim narratives for people of color and other marginalized identities who have demonstrated resilience and power in the face of struggle. Instructors are often careful in scaffolding content in a way that equips students with a multifaceted understanding before they take premature action that can be harmful to themselves, others, or larger causes. And so figuring out how to design a course that meets the objectives of learning the material, but does so in a way that helps students understand and experience resilience, resistance, joy, hope, and possibility is important. Liberatory practices, as Hopping said. As they shift beyond the classroom and into institutional change, I would like to reinforce that to teach across difference, while difficult, it is also done as a liberatory practice in service of hope and possibility. As Hooke so poignantly states, and Hopping demonstrated, the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. I add my voice to the collective call for renewal and rejuvenation in our teaching practices, urging all of us to open our minds and hearts so that we can know beyond the boundaries of what is acceptable, so that we can think and rethink, so that we can create new visions. I celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is this movement which makes education the practice of freedom. In March, I changed positions at Barnard. I am now the Vice President for Inclusion and Engaged Learning and the Chief Diversity Officer. Originally, this role was titled Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the school. The new title and my promotion into it reflects the college's commitment to DEI as engaged learning. I believe part of my responsibility includes ensuring students have the support systems and conditions to bring their whole selves to the learning process, as Hooke emphasizes in the definition of engaged pedagogy. So now my scope is widened to campus learning more broadly, which includes faculty, staff, and community partners. Diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't static and must be cultivated, and the new title showcases this is a process, not simply a one-stop shop for all things DEI, but one in which my office can help support other offices, departments, and communities learn so that others can steer their own ships. For example, together with the Dean of Faculty Diversity and Development, the CEP, Institutional Research, we have piloted a racial equity and inclusion community of practice with chairs from different academic programs and departments to create DEI departmental strategic plans. Chairs reviewed data packets created by IR, conducted their own departmental assessments on faculty, staff, and student climate, generated vision statements, set goals, defined student success, mapped curriculum, and learned from one another in monthly community of practice sessions. So getting at and bringing these sorts of practices beyond the single classroom and into the department at large. Another institutional commitment that I've worked closely on is with our president and provost is our approach to freedom of expression and inclusion. In June, I presented the topic to our Board of Trustees, using case-based learning strategies to discuss the issues, approaches, and perspectives of relevant academic freedom cases occurring in higher education. And in December, I led a panel of faculty in conversation with the board about teaching across difference in the classroom. This fall, Barnard's provost, Linda Bell, and I began facilitating a community of practice with faculty on this topic. In popular academic journalism, it has become common for academic freedom and inclusivity to be discussed as competing principles. We see this exercise as a unique opportunity for faculty from a range of departments and programs to work on connecting inclusivity to academic freedom in the classroom and in their scholarly circles. We've reviewed scholarship and cases that focus on language, pedagogy, research, digital media, and the public sector, guest speakers, academic staff, and students in bi-weekly meetings. Next fall, we will share a draft with different constituencies throughout the campus, including students, because as Ijoma pointed out, they have an important voice and perspective on these issues. We're also brainstorming how to engage more folks on our campus in kind of an understanding of what this means. So these are just a few examples of institutional work that is happening that builds on and provides more support for this work taking shape in the classroom. In order to be bolder in our commitments to equity and justice, we need to act on our commitments. The pandemic has taught higher ed that we can be nimble when we need to be, and institutional change can happen quicker than we think, as Derek pointed out. But it takes careful work, multidisciplinary collaboration, reaching across silos, and financial support to enact these new possibilities. I am eager to witness how the Doyle Engaging Difference program likewise pivots in the next 10 years as it engages faculty, staff, and students in academic departments on this campus. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and for contributing to making this a brave space, and for being brave enough to accept our invitation to come give a talk that synthesizes 3 talks that you wouldn't have heard prior to writing that talk. So we applaud you for that, as well as doing a wonderful job at it. Thank you. So now for just a closing couple of minutes of remarks, and then we'll move to the reception. Let me introduce Ryan Craig, who's the Director of Student Programs and Assistant Research Professor at the Berkeley Center and co-lead of the Doyle Program.
It has been a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon. Colleagues, guests, and friends, we have been eager to celebrate with you for over 2 years now. It's actually the 12-year anniversary, not the 10-year. Yes. As we've showcased today, the Doyle Program's support of innovative learning experiences continues to cultivate authentic and constructive engagement with differences inside and outside the classroom. While shaping engaged learning opportunities for over 200 Georgetown faculty members and over 5,000 students, the Doyle Program has also contributed to wider efforts to strengthen inclusive teaching and learning, helping us build a community in diversity at the university. We'd like to draw your attention to the Doyle Engaging Difference Program website, doyle.georgetown.edu. On the website, you can read more about the past decade of program accomplishments, highlighting the ways in which Georgetown is working to create a more inclusive culture of teaching and learning today. As we enter into our second decade of the Doyle legacy, focused attention to individual faculty has led to growth in school and program-specific work, paving the way for larger university-wide efforts for institutional shifts, which Jennifer so eloquently helped us contextualize this afternoon. Building on cohort work and school-level engagement, we are poised to launch a university-wide inclusive and culturally responsive pedagogy initiative that will enable all departments and academic units on campus to engage more deeply in equipping students and faculty to effectively and empathetically listen to others across lines of difference. From my vantage point, working directly with students participating in Doyle programs, I can attest to the transformative power of what attentive support for students can yield. One recent participant, Renee Matare, in our Doyle Global Dialogue, which facilitates peer-to-peer conversations as students reflect on their experiences of religion, culture, politics, and society when they are studying abroad, Renee remarked, "I have realized that there is a lot that could be easily dismissed in intercultural, interreligious experiences without taking things into careful consideration. It is hard to appreciate everything that is offered in an experience abroad if you do not take time to share your experiences with others. I've learned and continue to learn what it means to be a true global citizen." As an educator, I cannot imagine a better student learning outcome. This kind of deep, reflective learning made possible through the Doyle Program's resources also embodies our Jesuit commitment to raise up the next generation of leaders in academia, policymaking, and the professions, a future I am excited to see. As we come to the end of our program today, we have many people to thank for making this happen. Randy Bass, Tom Banshoff, Eddie Maloney, Michael Kessler have faithfully stewarded the Doyle gift and vision for the last decade alongside Maggie DeBilius and Jocelyn Lewis, who gave shape to and cultivated the campus-wide Doyle initiatives we have today. Maggie, Jocelyn, Michelle, and I have been supported this year by Ijoma, as she mentioned earlier, and our graduate assistant, Jordan Davis. We could not have made this celebration happen without the event and communication support of my Berkeley Center colleagues, Ruth Gopin, Amy Vandervliet, Shimeng Tong, and our student assistants in the back, and our former colleague, Henry Brill. In addition, we would very much like to thank our AV partners at Optimum, especially Woodra Keen and Kyle Schroetel, for making this happen online. And we are very delighted that people have been able to join us virtually. I would like to offer one more round of thanks to our panelists and guest speaker today as well. Derek, Ajoma, Huapeng, Anne, and Jennifer, we are so grateful for your time and your enthusiasm in sharing about the work that you've been doing. Many, many thanks. With that, I'll hand it back over to Randy to close us out.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming here online. As Ryan said, for those with strong arithmetic skills, it is indeed the 12th anniversary. This event got pandemicked multiple times, and we are so happy to have pulled this off and to have had you here present for this moment of celebration. So thank you. There's a very light reception off to the right that we invite you to join, and we just cannot thank you enough for giving of your time this afternoon. So with that, we are closed. Thank you.